Okay. All right. Welcome to our public outreach meeting at Broadview Learning Center on Tuesday, August 20th, 6 p.m. I'm Anna Killian Hansen with Housing and Neighborhood Development. We look forward to hearing your feedback. We appreciate you being here right now. We're going to turn it over to Deborah Meyerson, our consultant, who will be handling this public outreach.
Thank you. And thank you for your patience while we sorted out the technological stuff. It looks like we're all up and running, which is awesome. And we appreciate that you're here at a hybrid meeting. We have people here both in person as well as online, and we will be toggling back and forth to get your feedback on that. I'm Deborah Meyerson with Meyerson Consulting. I'm part of the team that is helping with the consolidated plan and analysis of impediments for fair housing choice update. I will ask the online team to also introduce themselves, please.
Yes, my name is Bill Wozlewski. I'm principal with Mullen and Lonergan, actually president of the firm, and we've been we're the prime consultant that's been hired by the city to carry out the consolidated plan and analysis of impediments to fair housing. And my colleague Samantha, go ahead, Samantha.
Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Walters Lewis, and I'm a community development specialist with M&L.
Great, thank you both. And I'm here as a local resident as well as a consultant because I'm doing the public outreach or helping to coordinate that. So this is the first of 3 public meetings in addition to a series of stakeholder workshops we're having between now and September 3rd. If we could get the slides started, that would be great. I have them in my car. I have just my written notes. It's in the Google Drive, if you can access that. Okay. Shall I just do it for my written notes? Because it seems like the slides might be elusive. Okay. Okay, so thanks again for your patience. Hopefully the slides will catch up. But this is a consolidated planning process. And every 5 years, the city is here to complete a consolidated plan to set priorities for use of 2 different sources of federal funds: community development block grants, also called CDBG, and home investment partnership funds, both of which are there to support a variety of community development programs, as well as housing. And the city, this is part of the city's preparing its new plan for fiscal year 2025 to 2029. Every year, the city prepares also an action plan, an annual action plan to describe to the public and to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development how it intends to spend its annual allocation. The 5-year plan also includes, right now, it will include the first year plan of this 5-year cycle. So it'll also include that annual action plan. So I'll talk a little bit about these different kinds of federal plans. So there's, again, 3 different things that this meeting is helping to support. And one includes an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, also called an AI for short, for analysis for impediments. And it identifies barriers that restrict housing choice for members of 7 protected classes and recommendations to resolve those barriers. Then there's the consolidated plan, sometimes abbreviated as CON plan or CP, to describe community development priorities and goals over the next 5 years based on an assessment of affordable housing and community development needs, as well as market conditions and available resources. And then finally, there's the annual action plan that I'd mentioned. It describes how the city will use these federal funds to address the identified needs in 2025. Yay, thank you. Okay, so we are now on slide 3, please. Awesome. Okay, so I just finished actually this slide, but just so you see it in front of you in addition to what I just said. But If we could go to 4, yeah. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit further about each of these programs just to give you a sense of what this is, because again, this planning process helps inform how the funds are spent by the city, and your feedback helps to develop those plans to help develop those priorities. So we'll go to the next slide, please, for community development block grant basics. CDBG 101, again, this is funds that are administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD. Again, we're in federal space. We got lots of acronyms and abbreviations to work with. And so cities, states, and some counties are eligible to receive CDBG, again, Community Development Block Grant funds, annually from HUD. And so the overarching goals of CDBG funds to provide decent, safe, and sanitary housing, to provide a suitable living environment, and to expand economic opportunities. And the way these are split up, I guess we might see this in the next one. Well, I'll talk about the programs, but there's 2 different sources of funding that are administered by the city for social services funds as well as for physical improvements. So the activities that the CDBG, that's a national reason that the federal funds are given out to provide benefits to low and moderate income persons and to prevent or eliminate slum and blight. And it must meet an urgent need that threatens the health and welfare of residents. The CDBG program, again, there's questions about what's eligible, what's not eligible, a little bit of an overview of that. So there's private nonprofits that are corporations, associations, agencies or with a nonprofit status as a 501c3, and then city departments are both eligible for that. Next slide, please. And so an example of some of the eligible activities, we've got housing rehabilitation, public facilities and improvements, public services, demolition, acquisition, and program administration. And again, agencies apply each year for the CDBG funds. There's a separate committee that reviews that, but this is helping to drive those priorities in terms of even what the applications are eligible for and the priorities of the community. So ineligible costs examples include fundraising, political activities, expenses required to carry out regular responsibilities or functions of local government, income payments, building or a portion thereof used for the general conduct of government, and then purchase of equipment, fixtures, motor vehicles, furnishings, or other personal property. It's just representative. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's just to give you an example of what the money can be used for and what it's not to be used for. Next, please. So this is just a little bit about how to qualify for an eligible activity. Again, it needs to serve low and moderate income households, at least 70% of the funds, and then address slum and blight, no more than 30% of the funds. And then how is low and moderate income defined or qualified? That includes an area benefit for a service area for a public improvement or facility, income intake. Programs that primarily serve low and moderate income individuals and families are eligible for funding. The definition of a moderate income family is no more than 80% of the area median income. Again, lots of different terminology to bounce through here, and that's adjusted for household size. And then the presumed benefit, some groups are assumed to be low and moderate income, and these include abused children, battered spouses, elderly persons, people with disabilities, homeless persons, illiterate adults, migrant farm workers, and persons living with AIDS. So again, it's just kind of trying to give a little map of how these funds are administered. Next, we're going to look at the basics for Home Investment Partnership Program. We'll just go to the next slide, please. So the Home Investment Partnership Program is to help provide safe and decent housing for low and moderate income households. And eligible activities may include rental housing, owner-occupied or for-sale housing, home buyer assistance, rehabilitation, new construction, or tenant-based rental assistance. Next slide, please. So a minimum of 15% of each year's home allocation must be used for a community housing development organization project. That is often abbreviated as a CHODO. Again, more acronyms. But just what is a certified CHODO? That is a community-based nonprofit organization. It's focused on increasing affordable housing, and the board for that CHODO, again, typically a nonprofit organization, has to be composed of community residents. Next, please. Yay. Okay, so this is now discussing what is an analysis of impediments to fair housing. Again, lots of stuff to just get a little bit of an introduction to, or at least a refresher on if you've heard of it before. Next slide, please. So the AI is there to identify barriers that restrict housing choice for members of protected classes. And so there's 7 protected classes. That's actually on the next slide, so we'll get to that. But it uses demographic and housing data to determine impediments that are limiting fair housing choice in a jurisdiction. So sometimes it can be a little confusing. Affordable housing, fair housing, they're definitely have relationships to each other, but they're also very different things. And it's important to value and understand what those are because, again, it increases access to housing to have it be both affordable and fair access. So it also uses input from stakeholder participation to identify potential impediments for fair housing. And then the development of a fair housing action plan proposes specific actions to address identified impediments. So we'll just go to the next slide, which has these 7 protected classes. It's a federal Fair Housing Act. There's also one at the state level that mirrors this. And then at the local level, there's a couple more categories that fall into this. But the basic 7 classes include race, color, national origin, religion, sex, which includes gender identity and sexual orientation, familial status, and disability. And so again, just an idea of how that these are both all things that we're collecting your feedback on. So what's the schedule for the current effort? This is again, the beginning. It's with the public meetings and the stakeholder workshops starting today. We have these meetings going on through September 3rd. We will have a draft ready by November, and that will be internal. We'll have a draft annual action plan. That's March 15th. That's AAP. And then this will come back to the public in the spring, in April. So we'll have a public comment period. There'll be a public hearing in April 2025. So we hope you will come back and see how your feedback has been incorporated into the plans that we've discussed. And you can, again, comment, see if we got it right, if there's things that were missed, but just to provide some feedback on that. And then finally, the final adoption will be in May 2025. And then it gets submitted to HUD in time for the program year start of July 1st. So with that, we're going to open it up to discussion and questions. You are welcome to ask questions about any of the stuff that I've just talked about, because it's a lot of stuff I just unloaded. But we also would like to hear your feedback. And I do have some specific questions here that I hope will help spark your ideas of what it would be helpful to hear from you about, in addition to just learning more about these programs. So questions to consider. What barriers do you or people in your community face when trying to access affordable housing? And this is, again, partly about affordability, and it's partly about the fair housing is in here as well. How do current cities' policies and programs impact your ability, your community's ability to find safe and affordable housing? In your experience, are there neighborhoods or parts of the city where affordable housing is more difficult to find? If so, what factors contribute to these issues? What types of housing assistance or programs could help to ensure fair access to affordable housing? And then finally, are there any specific groups in the community who face greater challenges finding affordable housing or experiencing more housing discrimination? And what can the city do to address those challenges? And I'll just also break that down a little bit. We are talking about both rental and owner-occupied housing here, because obviously people need all kinds of different types of housing. So we can leave this up here, but I'm going to open this up for discussion. Again, if you have questions, if you have comments, that's what we invite you here for. The one thing I'm going to say is this is our mic. So I hope you will overcome any stage fright, but we're recording this. Again, it's part of the public process. We really do want to hear from you, but I hope you will be able to ask it, but not from sitting there, but come join me up here and talk into this mic. So I will start you with that, stop talking, and invite you to engage with me.
And Deborah, if I could just add, we're encouraging any kind of comments from you all in terms of anything related to affordable housing, changes over the last 5 years in your community, things that you've seen, emerging issues that you've seen, community development issues, need for public improvements, road improvements, anything that you feel related to these 2 programs, community development block grant and home programs, in terms of affordable housing, public services, public improvements, any of those types of things that you feel are needed within the community. We really want to be good listeners and take good notes The purpose of this meeting is to really incorporate input that we receive from both the stakeholder sessions as well as the public meetings to help inform the city. And again, it's really important because it will help focus and frame the city's decision-making process over the next 5 years as it comes to addressing, as it relates to addressing those needs identified in this 5-year plan for the next 5 years with its federal resources. So again, we want to be good listeners today and take really good notes. And again, these questions on the screen are just guided questions for comments, but really we want anything you feel comfortable providing input on needs or changing things in the community, we'd be really interested in hearing today.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Bill. Because again, think 5 years ago, the last time we did this was 2019, pre-COVID, right? So a lot of things have changed since then in many ways, and not just because of COVID. Things just happened in 5 years. But that may be especially if you think before and now, there's other things that may be relevant to that. So just to kind of think of it in that context. And maybe just why you came here today in terms of what your own experiences are. Again, what you observe, not just from necessarily your own personal experience, although that's certainly important, but even just, again, others in the community that you, your family, your friends, your work colleagues, etc.
Shelley.
Okay, yeah, and I'm sorry.
Shelley, go ahead.
Thank you. Just we also have online folks. So I'm looking at the folks in front of me, but we also have 11 people online. So
right, and Shelley has her hand raised. So go ahead, Shelley. Shelley Taylor.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Thank you for having this meeting. I actually live in an HOA, and I realize that, at least I'm aware that the city isn't responsible necessarily for HOAs. And I also realize that HAND hasn't really, to my knowledge anyway, handled HOAs. But the reason that I bring this up today is that there are so many HOAs in our city that are failing, and many of us moved into these HOAs, you know, thinking that our fees were going to be a certain way, and while our property values seem to be going down, our HOA fees seem to be going up, and we have a situation where a lot of people can't afford the fees and the assessments anymore. And I know this from being a past board member, but now I'm just a homeowner and I'm not a current board member. But I wonder if HAND would be able to consider adding HOAs to the people that you help.
thank you. And I think I got some of this from your follow-up comments, but I just wanted to see if you might expand a little bit on when you say HOAs are failing. Can you just maybe address that a little bit more directly? I just want to make sure I'm connecting the dots with your comments.
Okay, I guess by that I mean you know, when we have HOAs are set up in that they have amateur homeowners. Often they have amateur homeowners running the neighborhood, governing the neighborhood, amateur, you know, people who are not professionals. And I have found, being a long-term resident here, I mean, I've been here for quite some time, since 2010, that, you know, boards, you know, will try something and then they'll try something else, and it may have worked, it may have not worked. In large part, I think because we've got homeowners trying to run a neighborhood. Whereas when you have rentals, you have, you know, someone who's, you know, HAND is overseeing those rentals, for example. We don't have any oversight. One hopes that the property management would be that oversight, but that doesn't always occur that way. And it just seems like it's kind of a Wild West free-for-all type of situation in a lot of the HOAs. And so what you have is, you know, you don't have enough money in reserves, or something fails, a big project fails. Like our neighborhood right now has a has a big project that we're being assessed for, and we will be assessed for, and it's just very stressful. So for a lot of people living here. So I just I guess that's what I mean by failing: lack of oversight and huge projects coming down the pike that there isn't enough money in reserves for. And then also property values not really matching the fees, the HOA fees.
So
Does that make sense?
can I ask a follow-up question? Why is the property values not appreciating in your neighborhood? We've heard a lot of comments earlier in our discussions about housing costs going through the roof in the city. So just could you talk a little bit about why you feel that your housing value has decreased and the reasons for that?
Well, I guess I mean, you know, in terms of the fees, in terms of the assessments, and it just seems like you mean brass tack numbers. I mean,
Well, estimates.
I could come to another meeting with more information in front of me. But offhand, in large part, HOAs don't really, you know, the property values don't really go up that much. And then, like I said, the HOA fees and then assessments for large projects like a drainage basin or new roofs or new siding and, you know, this type of thing. So I guess what, can you repeat your question again about?
Yeah, just you just made a comment that housing values aren't keeping up with your fees, right? So it would seem to me, based on things we've heard previously in other meetings with stakeholders, that housing values across the city are going up. I was just interested in that specific issue of your housing value not keeping up, and what the reason for the housing values, regardless of the fact that your assessment fees are going up and you have these larger scale improvement projects. I just really wanted to focus in on the value of the house issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have to get back with you on that with a more informed response. I guess what I am noticing is, for example, the neighborhood across the street, you know, their property values are higher than ours. I mean, their properties can sell for much more than ours, but yet our monthly fees are going to, what we've been told in 2025 is pretty much almost match theirs. And you know what I mean? That kind of thing just doesn't make sense.
Gotcha.
But I think one of the other reasons the property values are suffering is, you know, again, just lack of maintenance, lack of upkeep, you know, reserve studies. You know, again, if there's not money in the bank to handle the things that, you know, in a timely manner that the reserve study suggested, then you have a backlog of things that need to be done.
Thank you. I know that Anna Killian Hansen has a comment to add to the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to clarify to what you are speaking about is primarily in situations like condominiums where the HOA is going to be maintaining the common spaces and you have more of that going on. I can think of at least 2 neighborhoods right now with that issue. I will say that the reduction in values, in my opinion, and what I've noticed, is associated with the conditions that are present, which makes sense. If they're assessing more fees, you have more issues, you have more condition issues. So if we're in a condominium complex where you have some significant issues, let's say that it's siding, roofing, drainage basins, these are all things that are pushing your monthly payments out of reach. So if they're charging $500 a month on top of your rent to account for these common space maintenance items, then it's not as appealing to a home buyer. You're getting less for your money. So I think that is where I see the value going, Bill, if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. Thank you for clarifying that.
And again, I can add a little bit context to that. So these are federal funds, right, that the city receives for public improvements. And generally, these are made on public right-of-ways and public roads for sewer improvement projects and street improvement projects. And again, I don't know specifically where you live or the ownership specifically of your association, but typically associations, all of the internal roads and sewers are deeded back to the homeowners association for maintenance. So I'm not sure that, the city could use their CDBG funds on projects for improvements such as you're requesting. But again, I don't know enough details about it. It would just seem to me that if they're private roads owned by the association and private infrastructure, that the city would maybe have a difficult time funding that sort of project, but I would defer to Anna on that.
Right, and if I could just respond, I think the issue here is that while they are considered private property, the fact is that they drain to public property. You know what I mean? They affect other public property, city property, and also HOA members pay some city fees, like stormwater and trash pickup and things like that we aren't receiving from the city. And yet HOAs do impact city property because of the drainage basin issues and things like that. So anyway, I just thought I'd add that. I don't mean to take up all your time on the HOAs.
No, we really appreciate your comments, and we can look into it further and get more clarification. Again, these are just general thoughts off the top of my head based on what you said. So we can dig into it a little bit more. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others who are here in person or online who have a hand raised or would like to weigh in? Okay. Would you mind stepping up? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Mhm.
So my name is Fiona. Thank you guys for having this meeting today, so that we can share our opinion and perspective on some of the issues that we face as a community. So I currently am I would say, housing choice voucher recipient. So for me, my experience has always been challenging to find affordable housing in the community of Bloomington, because oftentimes the rent is either too high for them to be able to cover payments on our behalf, or they just exclusively state that we do not have to accept the voucher and that they do not have to proceed with any type of, formal housing or, process that I wanted to initiate with them. So that to me was disheartening, especially when I want to find housing that is more conducive for a safe and peaceful living environment. I don't find that much in my area. So I think there should be improvements in some parts of town. I won't name parts at this time since it is, where I stay, but there are locations in Bloomington that could be improved with, resources in the community so that there will be safer living conducive situations, especially if you are trying to find safe housing. And I feel like that isn't being taken as an important issue. So yes, I think for number one, the barrier that I faced was, of course, high rent amounts, especially in particular areas of town where limited landlords are on the program. And so it's kind of hard to find and seek out which landlords may be able to work with you because there's a very small pool of them. So it's kind of like you have to find someone quickly, make your connection, and hope for the best. There's not like a really great guide to kind of figure out who all could facilitate with that process. There is a packet, however, that we do receive as tenants that gives us information on landlords that may or may not accept the housing choice voucher. However, most times than not, they have discontinued from the program. So it doesn't always align with what you're receiving. And so that does take up more time in the search of a new apartment or home. So if there would be something kind of like an apartment or housing fair where landlords and people in the community come together and kind of talk about these resources that are available to residents, as opposed to us trying to hunt them down, would probably make things a little bit more easier in that process. And I think I wanted to also mention, as a single household member, you may not receive as the same benefits as someone that has like children or dependents or anything like that. So it does make it a little bit more challenging to to have like enough funds to apply for housing. So that can be a barrier as well if you're like, you know, just by yourself on the government program, because you don't get as much as like other individuals that do need that for their dependents. And yeah, so I think if it were to be a perfect world, and I'm not saying that this is what this will end up being, but if we had it to where most or not all landlords in Bloomington, Indiana had to accept the program of the Bloomington Housing Choice Voucher, then that would really be a benefit to the community as a whole. Because if I am eligible to receive this funding, and if I qualify, why can't I use it to live in a safe environment? So those are my thoughts and ideas on this matter. And I really appreciate everyone taking the time to have this meeting and listen to the public's voice in this matter.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question? I was really interested. Those very good comments related to the need for fair to help identify resources. Could you talk a little bit about what specific resources are you specifically speaking of, like kind of connecting voucher holders with landlords, or are you talking about other types of resources within the community?
Yeah, connecting housing choice voucher recipients with landlords. If like landlords in the community that were willing and able to meet with us in like one location, kind of like how students on campus have an apartment tour or an apartment fair on campus for them to select their housing in the next future. It would be very, you know, helpful to have something like that of that nature for us to be able to select suitable housing and meet someone face to face, have that connection, and feel that we are being supported as members of the community.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One thing I will just mention, just because I understand what you've described, is that in the state of Indiana, what's called discrimination based on source of income, which means not accepting vouchers in some cases, local governments cannot require that landlords accept them. They can incentivize it. And I know that the city of Bloomington does that in some cases. And so I'm just, in terms of understanding what the scope is, that may be something that could be considered. But there's just the way the state has laid things out. So just, again, this is to gather feedback so that we can decide how the city should prioritize the resources it does have to address some of the concerns that you've raised. I appreciate your time to do that. Are there other experiences, observations that folks either in person or online would like to share as part of our conversation today? Oh, and sorry, just one other quick thing I wanted to mention. I don't know if Angela's put it in the chat yet, but we do have a survey as well. And Angela said she has put it in the chat, and we'll have a slide at the end for folks in person just to make sure you have access to that, because it's partly designed for people who can't come to a public meeting. But if there are specific things about specific areas that you're like, okay, this area really needs, you know, more, even if maybe in a public meeting, don't necessarily want to kind of put it out there, put it in the survey, because it will be helpful to do that. So just encouraging you, even if there's things you leave here today and you think of other things that you didn't get a chance to talk about, the survey is another way to do that. And that will be open through September 10th. So just want to mention that. Again, it's in the chat box, and we'll make sure that you have access to that information before you leave.
Deborah, Nicholas Hall has his hands up.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Nicholas, would you like to share with us?
Sure, thank you. It's I guess a bit of a comment, but more I guess a question, and that is the degree to which student housing impacts the programs, impacts developers, is there analysis on how it impacts, kind of the average cost of rent? I can't help but see all the luxurious looking complexes being developed in Bloomington. I know are, I think, entirely designed for students, much nicer than when I was a student. Um, and then certainly you see the condition of some homes. I'm in the Bryant Park neighborhood, but you see some of the conditions of certain homes, and you can just tell, kind of seems right away, that's probably student housing. And I'm just kind of curious, how does that impact sort of the overall affordability, or how does that challenge affordability? Are there any particular strategies that you all consider or look at to try and sort of address how that impacts the overall affordability of housing in Bloomington?
Yeah,
It's a
I could
great
take that.
question.
Anna, if you want to take that, I could take it. But generally, that's absolutely true. Student housing has negatively impacts affordable housing. It takes up available inventory in the marketplace. Developers who are creating these units are, building nicer units, again, for students, not the general population. And it takes up existing units, which, restricts supply, which obviously increases demand and raises costs. So it absolutely has an impact. I don't know if there's, I know the city has worked on several recent affordable housing studies. I don't know, Anna, if there's any specific things in there that would talk about the direct impact of student housing on the affordability in the city. Would you happen to know that off the top of your head?
Sorry.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure exactly what you're after there. I do know that we're at about 90% occupied units across the city. And that includes those student rentals. So I think it's just a supply issue in general as well. And I think one of the things that impacts it is that there's very limited housing on the campus of IU. There's only about 12,000 beds on IU campus. So that does put the burden out into our community, but to say that there's a significant amount of student housing that's sitting vacant is inaccurate. We're looking at about 90% occupied right now.
Yeah, that's a key figure, Nicholas. 90% occupancy is super high, which obviously restricts supply and increases demand and prices.
I'll just add, because that's definitely important in terms of understanding the student picture. Land is expensive in Bloomington, right? There's a limited amount of developable land, and partly, as Anna was saying, it's a supply issue. And it's a matter of, well, if land's expensive, developers are often going to look for the most profitable market to build for, and that tends to be students. In addition, though, there's looking at how to add more housing, and looking at what ways, in terms of, again, some of the questions are about city policies and regulations, what could help support the production of more housing that's not just where students are likely to build, in terms of there's neighborhoods with low density that could have more housing in it, and just looking at how to increase the opportunity to produce more housing. And so again, it's because housing is not going to get built unless you have the numbers work in terms of that it's financially feasible to build it, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, it still has to be feasible. And there may be some subsidy that's needed in order to make it feasible. But I'm just trying to look at the reason that student housing has been such on a run is that because that's how the cost of development gets paid for with that income. So looking at how to increase housing options, and housing production that can help supplement the current conditions. So.
Looks like Nicholas had a follow-up.
Yeah, I was going to comment two areas that I know fairly well. Tucson, Arizona, Nashville, Tennessee, both are promoting, increasing density within existing neighborhoods, making it, I guess, a little bit easier to put a second property, a second dwelling on a piece of land. I guess I'm curious, is that something that that has been looked at or considered or being promoted anyway in any of the existing neighborhoods in Bloomington?
So I think that's something that I definitely want to pursue. And that is to take a look at our unified development ordinance. There's a couple of things within it that are particularly troubling. And so, yes, increased density would definitely help stem the tide a little bit. There's also a requirement of a lot of these buildings that are getting built to have main level commercial space. And after COVID, we just do not have the commercial demand. We have a lot of it that's sitting vacant. So those could be turned into units potentially. But the housing study of 2020 indicates that when the UDO was put in place, it was nice because it gave everybody clear playing rules for development. However, the housing study indicates that once that was put into place, there should be an annual or semi-annual or periodic review of the UDO. And that has not occurred since COVID, since 2020. So we really do need to take a look at the UDO and see where there's opportunities to increase density, where we can make some modifications to, again, the main level commercial space requirement. And there may be some other ways that we can help address it. But I am very aware of this. This is something that we're talking about. It has not happened yet. So Nick, you're correct.
Thank you. So just terminology, the UDO, as Anna said, Unified Development Ordinance, that's just the term locally for the local zoning code, and zoning is land use regulations determining how land can be used, whether it's residential, commercial, retail, et cetera. And so that's just, again, the most recent update was adopted in 2020. And I think there's definitely consideration for how amendments might revisit what it has accomplished since then and what it has not in terms of addressing, in this case, local housing needs. Welcome. Any other comments or questions? I mentioned the fair housing. We've talked about that a little bit, and I mentioned the 7 protected classes. Again, affordability and fair housing often intersect, even though they are distinct areas, but also welcome any observations, concerns you may have dealing with fair housing questions as well. And that is both, again, rental and owner occupied, of whether you have experience with being having access to housing or facing discrimination. So. See a question in the online.
Yes, Shelley has a question. Shelley Taylor.
Hi, I just wanted to tag on to the comments I made about the HOA earlier, and that is that I'm just hoping that hand would also look at the fact that we have, for example, in our neighborhood, we have a lot of neighborhoods just directly across the street and down the street. We have a school, elementary school, basically in our backyard, and so to your point about the property values, or to my point about the property values and your question about that, the health of our HOA and other HOAs do affect neighboring communities, and neighboring communities' property values are certainly going up higher than ours. So I do see that a relationship could exist, between these quote unquote private properties and city properties, for the health of all the residents of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. One of the things that came up a little bit earlier is if you have a perspective, if you've been in the community for, let's say, the last 5 years, of what has perhaps changed over that time, because this is partly an update. We have a consolidated plan that's in its final year right now that has been guiding the city's use of the federal funds that are part of this. But just trying to think of what should be changed or updated based on that, if you feel like you have that perspective to share. Yeah, no. Sure.
For question 4, is it stating what type of like assistance programs already existing could help, or programs that could be created? You know, is that like an open-ended question like that?
Yeah, so I'll just rephrase Fiona's question just because I've got the mic and that way you don't have to get up. She's asking about question 4 on this slide, which is what types of housing assistance or programs could help to ensure fair access to affordable housing. And what I heard you ask was, is this about existing programs or is it about the potential creation of new programs? And I think everything's open at this point in the sense of, are there programs either that you have or any folks who are here have experienced, had access to, feel like they are working well to make sure they stay funded, they could be improved or could be created, such as like the housing fair that you mentioned for voucher holders. There may be other elements like that, or again, other programs that you've experienced, wondered about, benefited from, and want to make sure stay part of the current landscape going forward for the next 5 years, or things that could be expanded. One example I'll mention, and I honestly will say I don't know if I know the source of the funding for the landlord risk mitigation program, if it uses federal funds or not, but I'm just going to give an example of a program that's recent that I think is still going to be moving forward. And the landlord risk mitigation fund is there to help expand the number of landlords who may accept vouchers, in the sense that sometimes there's a stigma or a fear of what vouchers represent. And the landlord risk mitigation fund is there to provide education both for tenants as well as for landlords. And it provides an insurance policy of sorts, in the sense that if you accept the voucher, 1, you'll have a tenant who's taken some of this tenant education, and 2, you get a guaranteed source of income from the voucher, and 3, there's the insurance of if something does not go as you expect, that there is some funding to help cover unexpected damage, costs, et cetera. And hopefully it doesn't need to be used, but it provides, again, that peace of mind to hopefully expand the landlord pool that accept vouchers. So that's just an example of a fairly recent program that's still, growing and getting established, but it's an important element to help provide the housing options and to expand the landlord pool.
Deborah, we have a hand up, Nicholas.
No, I mean, I appreciate what was just shared, because I find it as someone that's considered homeless, considered being a landlord, I find it puzzling and appalling that landlords would discriminate against someone that has a voucher. I mean, $1 is $1. It's like guaranteed payment of that portion. It's a head scratcher to me. But I guess with the high occupancy, they see it as they just see it as if you're poor, that you're a higher risk for some unknown reason. I think if you're a student, you're probably a higher risk for your property. But I think I've begun to understand a little bit about that particular risk mitigation program. Are there any other ideas that have been tossed around, or any other types of incentives that have been considered, or is that actually the risk mitigation? Is that the sort of an initial effort at trying to increase the number of landlords that are willing to accept a voucher?
Yeah, I think that's one program, but I think the Housing Authority also is trying to actively recruit additional landlords to their program to some limited success. So I think they're actively engaged in doing that. So there's other resources and attempts going on in the community to help increase the supply of landlords that will accept vouchers.
Okay. And as mentioning tenant-based rental assistance, and I actually want to clarify, because that essentially is like a voucher, although if it could be affiliated with it's tenant-based. So are there any city locally based vouchers in addition to the housing choice vouchers, which are Section 8? Just because I know in some communities just that have housing challenges, sometimes that's an additional resource and it may not be yet something that's been considered locally.
But my budget memo, which will be released next week, is calling for a local fund to create a tenant-based rental assistance program that will be a little bit more nimble than the HUD.
Okay, great. And I'll just quick recap what Anna said because I'm at the mic, which is just there is discussion and potentially in a budget request, because it's the city's budget season is coming up next week, that would expand tenant-based rental assistance with a more flexible local fund that could, again, do something comparable to what housing choice vouchers do. And what housing choice vouchers do is they make sure that the tenant is spending no more than 30% of their income on their rent, because the voucher then supplies the funds between the actual rent and their income-based rent. So, yeah. Can you come up, please? Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Just quickly. It's Fiona. I love that idea of doing the housing fair. It's just, I need information always. And so the fair I thought was a great idea. And the things like the landlord rental mitigation fund. I didn't know anything about that. And I don't know, where does someone find info about things in general? Is there a good place? And you'd also mentioned the other one about the tenant-based rental. Yeah, just to read about these things.
Right. No, those are great questions in terms of what I'm hearing in terms of the interest in information is whether there might be the potential for a one-stop shop of how do you find all the resources, because they maybe have different funding, they may have different calendar cycles, they might have different eligibility, and how do you find all of those in one place? And I don't know that there is one resource. Now, certainly HAND is an excellent resource, but like that Landlord's Risk Mitigation Fund is administered through the Bloomington Housing Authority. And certainly, these are agencies that are in communication with each other, but nonetheless, it might be a little more piecemeal to get different elements that, would help support housing stability for renters.
So there's just something that could be on the to-do list.
Right. And when I say for renters, but there's clearly other resources available for homeowners, especially maybe first-time homeowners, maybe down payment assistance. And so, for many renters, their goal is to be a homeowner and to make sure they know what resources are available to help them transition to homeownership, if that is a possibility. And down payment assistance can again help lower the bar to access homeownership. So I think, having a resource that can help keep track of the various programs and funds that are available would be helpful. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Oh, that's true.
What's it?
Housing dashboard has access.
Okay. But again, one wouldn't just know about that.
Right.
Okay. And real quickly, the number 4 about the programs could ensure, was that it? Anyways, I had an idea that maybe, I know in my neighborhood, there's a lot of really rundown houses. And I didn't know, and this may already exist, if there's help to spiff up a home that then they could put it on the market to rent, or someone could buy it.
Yeah, I know Hand has a housing repair program. I would lean on Anna to describe that or to just explain the scope of that, just because I don't want to misrepresent anything. Thank you.
Sit so far away. We have a couple of different programs. So both through home and CDBG for rehabs. There's one that's the accessible living. So if somebody needs a wheelchair ramp or something like that, there's a program to apply for. There's also emergency home repair. Somebody gets a hole in their roof, needs a furnace, that kind of thing. That's an option. And then there's what's called an owner occupied rehabilitation as well. So we do operate all of those programs. It's on an application basis. We do have a little bit of a backlog at the moment, but those are programs that are available currently and will continue.
Thank you. I'll mention one other thing that I don't think exists yet, but I'd like to say should or could exist, which is energy efficiency for rental homes, in the sense, especially for a multifamily, where there's a gap between if the tenant is paying for their utilities and but it would be up to the property owner to provide the energy efficiency, because not only can rent be a burden, but the cost of utilities can be quite high as well. And that can often push housing into the range of unaffordability. So looking at how to align those interests potentially so that there's an incentive for property owners who rent their households to do the energy efficiency that would then ultimately have the benefit of greater affordability for renters. Yeah, I'll rephrase you if you don't want to step up. No,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry.
Or you can step up. Yeah, that's great. I don't need to rephrase. I'm happy to let you do the talk.
Sure.
I promise this is like my last time. And thank you for giving me kudos for that. And I think it would be a really great idea to have that. The fair, so I can make sure I'm being more clear. I wanted to address this particular instance of where I have found it challenging to, kind of elevate while on governmental programs. As much as I have benefited greatly from having a voucher and having, different programs in time of need, I feel like when things are becoming more expensive, like you mentioned with like utilities, which you most times take care of on your own, or you have like groceries or other things like that, and you need more income, there is a threshold that you cannot surpass. And this threshold sometimes limits your ability to be able to find, better jobs, better experiences in the community, because you are limited into that income percentage. So I find that it's like really challenging to, earn money without that fear of like, oh, I'm going to be, cut off from the program and everything. And then then what? Because it's kind of a transition into independence financially when you were, on a program, and then you're just trying to make some earnings to be able to support yourself independently so that you don't have to rely on the government's resources. Because, I mean, maybe I'm seeing this incorrectly, but I don't think this is a lifelong thing that should be dependent on. It should be for the needs of those who are, more vulnerable in harm's way, or if they have like income that they just cannot do anything outside of what they've already done. But me personally, I want to be able to use it for its purpose, but then graduate from the program. So I was actually a part of an escrow program with the housing authority. where they match the funds that you put towards your rent and they put it in a savings account that you don't touch. And then they give you goals that you work on. So when you work on those goals after a certain point in time, you can access those funds if you were receiving, good status with your landlord and you were making payments on time. That to me was incentive to work on myself, my life, and my goals. It's not really incentivizing for me to get off the program if I feel like I can't have a transitionary period. That's like, to help me process the financial steps I need to take to be financially independent. So that brings me to the number 4 question. What types of housing assistance or programs could help to ensure fair access to affordable housing? And I think there should be something where there are funds allocated for people that are trying to transition out, where they just feel like, okay, I feel I can, take care of my necessities, but I don't have it quite yet. So maybe like a 6 or 12-month program where you're still receiving housing, but you're able to make more income so that whenever you're off the program in that time period, you don't have that lapse. So that was just an idea. And I just wanted to kind of, speak my mind on that and share how that could probably potentially help other people that feel like, I can, manage my finances in a better position now. I know what to look out for as far as like, safety in the community. So this would just be another asset for us to use so that we could be fully benefited by the program, because I don't think it would benefit any of us to play small. Thank you.
Thank you. That was all really good input.
I'm just going to suggest something that your comments make me think about, which is, again, we've talked a little bit about utilities. There are plenty of other resources that affect overall budgets in terms of that housing is one part of it, but I'm talking about transportation or childcare or healthcare as examples of food access, right? All things that impact the total budget that one has, whether for one's basic needs. And so even though the scope of this tends to be tilted towards housing, certainly some of what CDBG in particular addresses is community needs. And so just want to welcome any comments that might reflect on those based on, again, you could maybe replace the word housing in some of these in terms of what barriers do you or others in your community face when trying to access, again, transportation, healthcare, childcare, food, just to understand, because that's part of the bigger picture of basic needs. So I'm also just going to do a quick time check here. I know we got started a little bit late because of our technological issues. We also intended for this meeting to be just about an hour. We don't want to keep you past your intended time. I certainly welcome any further comments you have, but I also don't want to keep you past the expected time you anticipated to be here. So with that, I might just say if we could, oh, there's the survey. Okay. So, again, if you have other comments, other things, if you want to share the survey with others who could not make it tonight, we certainly welcome that. It's also available in Spanish. And so really encourage feedback in that way. There may be things that you can add or again, share with others who could not be present. And then the last slide, please. I don't know, I'm moving. It mostly is just contact. If you have other questions, things that, you want other conversation about, this is ways to share your feedback via email, mail, drop something off. But really appreciate your conversation tonight and feedback. Thank you for coming out both online as well as in person, and your patience while we had our technological stuff, but I'm glad we got it working. We will have 2 more public meetings. The next one is tomorrow at noon at the Downtown Public Library. It will also be hybrid. So people can log in online as well as come in person. And then the third will be September 3rd at Tri-North Middle School in the evening, also at 6 o'clock. And then we have several stakeholder meetings. We had one today at noon. We have 5 more. These are on specific topics and they're stakeholder workshops because they're oriented towards people who work in the field and work with clients who receive benefits from these programs. And it's just a way to hear from, again, a variety of stakeholders in the community. So thank you for coming tonight. Appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you, everybody.